Kassis on Blue-Red Delver against Joe Lossett on Miracles. Both players are 11-2. Joe is currently second on our leaderboard, as you see that number 2 next to his name.
Looking to turn that to a number 1 by the end of this weekend, though.
And Joe is the captain of Team Nerd Rage Games. So.
Yeah, Nerd Rage Gaming, a great team. We've got a lot of teams who have kind of, shown up this weekend, and a lot of the people who are on teams are doing well. I would say if you're really looking to get serious about competitive Magic, finding a team to be on is one of the important steps.
So Ely is going to start off with the Delver of Secrets, while Joe has a Scalding Tarn going down to 19 with a Sensei's Divining Top. Now Ely's Delver is not going to flip, but he is going to go into his second turn. And if he has something like Young Pyromancer, that could be a real good threat here, which he does. He's going to try and resolve Young Pyromancer, and we'll see if Joe decides to use Force of Will or something, and he does not.
So this is pretty great for Ely. We were talking before about how he's not going to have an advantage in the really late game, and so it is certainly ideal for Ely to sort of hit the ground running by having some early pressure. The fact that not only is he on the play, but he gets to have 1-drop, 2-drop, pretty rare occurrence in his deck, definitely bodes well for Ely.
Joe Lossett is going to fall down to 17 using his Flooded Strand to get another basic island, and he's going to land a copy of Counterbalance. Now,
wow.
Ely's deck is full of 1- and 2-mana spells. So is Joe Lossett's. That Sensei's Divining Top and Counterbalance is going to do some real work at preventing Ely from being able to, progress his board here. He just kind of has to hope at this point that Joe isn't able to find a Terminus to get rid of those threats. Yeah,
this is pretty amazing. We really get to see both decks essentially having their most powerful turn 1, turn 2 plays. But unfortunately, Counterbalance Top is probably stronger. Jeez.
And Ely's going to go for a second Young Pyromancer to try and further that board presence. And the blind flip from Joe with the Counterbalance is going to counter it with the Counterbalance on top. That's gross.
Yeah. So we're going to be able to see Ely have a small window of time where he's able to pressure Joe's life total. But Joe's Counterbalance and top are poised to take over this game.
So Joe's going to go ahead and activate his Sensei's Divining Top in his upkeep. Stack the top of his deck, I assume floating either a 1 or 2 to try and snag more spells with that Counterbalance. Also, Ely's Delver of Secrets has not flipped yet, so that is 4 points of damage that he's missed out on that Delver not flipping the turn after he cast it. So Joe is down to 14, could be 10, but that Delver hasn't cooperated.
Yeah, at the end of Ely's turn 2, it looked like he was in great shape because he had just gone turn 1, Delver, turn 2, Young Pyromancer. But Joe returning with a Counterbalance to start locking Ely out of the game, and the fact that Ely still hasn't generated any tokens or flipped his Delver is really unfortunate, quite frankly.
It looks like Ely's Delver is not going to flip again this turn. He also has 2 copies of Wasteland, so he doesn't have any more colored mana, but it looks like he found a Volcanic Island for this turn, so he is going to be able to start churning out some spells. Let's see what Joe decides to do with this Ponder with the Counterbalance trigger on the stack. So he's going to sacrifice his Arid Mesa, go get a basic Plains. I imagine he's going to top.
Yeah, so the silver lining of this is that while Ely's Ponder is likely to get countered, at least he's able to develop his board by getting that Young Pyromancer trigger and getting another token. The unfortunate thing is now that Joe has access to white mana, he may be able to set up a situation where he has a Terminus on top of his library, is able to draw it, miracle it, and then clear Ely's board.
So Joe is going to look at the top 3 with his Sensei's Divining Top. We still have a Ponder on the stack.
If Joe is able to find a Terminus in the next couple turns, I have to imagine that it's going to be lights out for Ely.
There's a Terminus right there in the top 3. So this is going to be bad news.
Joe is at 10 life, so I could see a way for Ely to win, but it's going to be real tough.
And there is a Snapcaster Mage. It's going to play its best Ambush Viper impersonation just to get in there, since he knows that Joe has a 1-mana spell on top of his deck. But he is going to be able to use this Terminus next turn if he wants to flip his top to draw a card and then cast the Terminus.
He'll probably cast it he may cast it on Ely's turn.
So we've got a Wizard as the name on that Caverner's Souls, which Snapcaster Mage, Vendilion Click, and Venser are all wizards.
So we could see Ely capitalize on that moment to cast his Snapcaster Mage, not wanting to wait until Joe's turn where he could start manipulating the top of his library with Sensei's Divining Top. And Ely is essentially all in on this board. I think Ely has accepted the fact that if Joe hits a Terminus, Ely's probably just going to lose and not really worry about it. And so he's trying to maximize the chance that he gets enough onto the board to give Joe the least amount of time to find that Terminus. But unfortunately, there it is.
So Joe is going to go ahead and flip his top, draw a Terminus, Miracle Trigger on the stack. It's going to resolve. Ooh, and Ely is actually just going to concede the game.
Yeah, I certainly thought that game came down to whether or not Joe would hit Terminus. Joe hit Terminus, Ely concedes. I didn't ask for these powers, but you know, I just...
Hopefully you just decide to use them for good.
Yeah, for now at least. We'll see.
Well, Joe Lossett is going to take game 1 against Ely Kassis and be one step closer to making it to the top 8 of this tournament with his Miracles deck. Let's take a look at the sideboards and see what the players have access to. Ely is going to have 2 Pyroblast, a Hydroblast, 2 Surgical Extraction, 2 copies of Blood Moon, a Submerge, a Pithy Needle, 2 Smash to Smithereens, 2 Sulfur Elemental, a No Rod, and a Mountain. What do we think Ely's going to do?
So I think that Ely's going to be bringing in the Pyroblasts. Joe has a lot of really good blue cards, not just the counter spells, but also Jace, Counterbalance that we saw last game. So I think the Pyroblasts are going to come in for sure. Pithing Needle and Smash to Smithereens are also ways that he can fight the Sensei's Divining Top, as well as Null Rod. And then the other card is Sulfur Elemental. Sulfur Elemental is a card that some people like to bring in when they think their opponents have Monastery Mentor. And so depending on if Ely thinks that Joe has Mentor, he may bring in Sulfur Elemental.
I also like Sulfur Elemental just because it's uncounterable. If Joe happens to have a 3 and a counterbalance, he can snag it that way. But since it has split second, Joe actually just can't stop it from entering the battlefield.
Right, so Sulfur Elemental has split second, meaning that Ely can cast it without Joe being able to do anything. So if Joe's essentially Divining Top in play, he won't be able to activate it to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library. But split second is still going to cause a counterbalance to trigger, meaning that if Joe randomly has a 3 on top of his library, that is the one way he could counter the Sulfur Elemental. But I agree, that is certainly one of the good things about the card.
Joe has a Wear and Tear, a Seal of Cleansing, a Cavern of Souls, an Izzet Staticaster, a Pyroblast, a Red Elemental Blast, 3 Flusterstorm, 2 Rest in Peace, a Pithy Needle, an Enlightened Tutor, a Back to Basics, and a Moat. What do we think Joe's going to do?
So I think the cards that Joe is going to bring in is he could bring in the Pyroblasts and the Red Elemental Blast. They tag the Delvers, the Snapcasters, and all the other blue permission spells that Ely could play. I don't think that Joe would bring in the Flusterstorms. The other card that he could bring in is Pithing Needle, but only if he's really scared of Dak Fade and knows that it's there, which I think is unlikely. And the other thing that Joe could have is there's a small chance he may want to bring in the Moat as a way to hold off Young Pyromancer. Izzet Staticaster is also another card that could be used to great effectiveness against Ely. I don't think Joe will bring in the Moat, but it'll be interesting to see if he does.
Yeah. So while our players finish up sideboarding, I just want to take a brief second, Andrew, and talk to you about the StarCityGames.com Creature Collection.
Ooh, lay it on me.
So these things are nice and cuddly. Available now, playmats, sleeves, player bundles. Currently we have the Zebra.
That is Stripes the Zebra. They have names.
The Zebra. We also have Grizzly Brand. So you've got a bear, he's got some tree trunk claws, he's got a picnic blanket.
It's going to give you all big bear hug and then bite your head off.
Yeah, definitely will bite your head off. And then we got Magus of the Moose. So again, these are available playmats, sleeves, and player bundles. If you'd like to learn more, go to StarCityGames.com/creature collection. You can get Stripes the Zebra, Grizzly Brand, and Magus of the Moose. So we'll go ahead and come back to our match. Ely Kassis, Blue-Red Delver, is currently 11-2 in the tournament. He's down a game against Joe Lossett, 11-2 with Miracles. He is currently second on our player leaderboard. If he is able to make the top 8 and potentially win this event, there's a good chance he could overtake Jeff Hoagland and be the top place on our points leaderboard. Yeah,
one other thing that's pretty cool about this narrative between Joe Lossett and Jeff Hoagland is Joe Lossett is sort of known as a legacy master, particularly with the Miracles deck. That's his sort of, whenever you think Joe Lossett, you definitely think Miracles. And he has done so well with that Miracles deck. Jeff, on the other hand, is really known for Modern. And Jeff has been playing his Kiki Core deck month in and month out and has had amazing results. So in the top 2 slots for the Players' Championship, we have 2 players who specialize in a specific format, are probably more well known for playing those formats than any other player, doing it with the same deck week in and week out, kind of ignoring fluctuations in the meta, only adapting to those fluctuations rather than changing their deck choice. And it'll be that's kind of like a nice little detail of like, is it going to be the Legacy Master that's on top or the Modern Master?
Well, we've got Joe Lossett has to get through Ely Kassis first. So
yeah, that's step 1.
Ely's on the play. He's going to lead with a Volcanic Island, pass back. Joe has a Plains. Ely has a second copy of Volcanic Island and a Young Pyromancer. So let's see if Joe has an answer. He does not. He will let it resolve. That basic Plains is not going to let him cast a counterbalance on turn 2 like he had last game. So this game is going to be a little bit more of a fight.
So I have to imagine that Ely's actually getting some of his better draws for the matchup. His deck is very creature light. He really only has 4 Delver and 4 Young Pyromancer as early action. He could run out a Snapcaster Mage if he wants on turn 2 for no value. But the fact that Ely is able to have some pressure on the first 2 turns of these games is pretty good for him.
So Joe is just going to play a Sensei's Divining Top. He'll use a Scalding Tarn, fall to 17 after the attack from Ely, and he's going to fetch a basic island and just pass the turn back. Ely has a Brainstorm. It's going to trigger Young Pyromancer. He's going to get an Elemental, and it looks like he found a copy of Null Rod. So if he's able to get that on the battlefield, he could shut down the Sensei's Divining Top shenanigans.
Null Rod is a pretty interesting card. It's one that you don't see too often. Every once in a while you see it as a one-of in Legacy sideboards. I think it's a card that actually sees a little bit more play in Vintage, but it's a pretty powerful card, and I know whenever I hear people talk about Null Rod, the people who have this on their sideboard feel like they swear by it. They just say that it's so good.
Yeah. Well, Joe is going to use his top in response to the Null Rod, and I did spy a copy of Terminus in there, so he is going to be able to take care of Ely's board next turn if he decides to rearrange the top of his deck and leave that Terminus on top.
So the one thing that's different about Terminus this game as opposed to last game is if Joe Lossett uses Terminus, he will be able to clear Ely's board, and Terminus is the best way to deal with a Young Pyromancer and its given tokens, but it's not going to be the 3 or 4 for 1 that it was last game.
Yeah, it's still just a 1 for 1.
Right. So also Joe doesn't have the counterbalance lock yet, so a Terminus isn't going to mean game over for Ely. So last game I thought it was pretty clear that Ely would concede at a Terminus, or the game would be over with a Terminus, but we are far away from a game state similar to that in this game, even though we're still in a similar range of turns.
So Joe's going to put the top 3 back. He's not going to draw with his top. He's not going to use a Terminus. He's just going to pick up a copy of Swords to Plowshares. I think he's just going to wait, give Ely a couple more turns to see if he wants to overextend into this looming Terminus.
Joe may also just Swords the Young Pyromancer and save the Terminus for a situation where Young Pyromancer gets more out of control. Leaving a 1/1 token, Joe probably feels like he can take a little bit of damage from this guy without having to worry about it.
So Joe does use his Swords to Plowshares on Ely's Young Pyromancer. Ely's going to go up to 22. The Still Donegan token is going to enter the red zone, knock Joe Lossett down to 16. Ely's going to add a Wasteland to his board and just pass the turn back.
Man, I bet Joe Lossett would be a lot more afraid if that was a CVM token.
Oh, I agree 100%. Now, it looks like Joe has a copy of Jace in his hand, so if he's able to get a second blue mana source, he could play Jace and even use it to kill that elemental.
So we've seen a lot of these Miracles decks prefer to play more basic lands rather than dual lands, and while it does give them a lot of resilience against a lot of the wastelands that their opponents could be playing, it can be a little awkward when they're trying to cast double blue spells and double white spells. So there is a cost to all these basics.
So here's the Council's Judgment from Joe. Well, now with it on the stack, Ely is going to go ahead and use his Wasteland, targeting Flooded Strand. Joe is going to sacrifice it in response, but now that Flooded Strand's not on the battlefield, Ely is going to be able to daze that Council's Judgment from Joe, and that's going to keep around the Null Rod for a while.
Yeah, and that's a pretty sweet play by Eli. I think a lot of people would miss it there, but Ely is quite the experienced legacy player, and he just sees all the angles.
I'll be honest, last time I played him, he got me with it too.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, I didn't play around dazed properly with my fetches and got my dig through time dazed, and it's not a good feeling.
So that die that Ely's putting on the board, I think, symbolizes the mana that he's floating, and now he's going to use that mana. So a really powerful set of plays from Ely, all on Joe's turn. So now he's going to be able to untap, get his mana back, get the pressure going again, and Joe Lossett may have to cash in that Terminus soon.
And I think the Terminus is the next card on the top of his deck.
Yeah.
So there's a very good chance that we see a Terminus this turn. Or maybe it's not.
Maybe it's the next card.
So there is a Wear and Tear.
I have to imagine that Joe did not foresee
this
set of events.
He just fetched and shuffled his deck.
Yeah.
So there's a Flooded Strand for Joe. He has a Wear and Tear that can take care of that No Rod.
Which is good, but he's getting to a position where he needs to deal with Ely's board.
Looks like he's just going to pass the turn back.
The thing that's a little awkward about this too is Joe has a Jace in his hand, which usually can play some pretty good defense by bouncing one of the opponent's creatures, but that Sulfur Elemental, it has flash, so Joe could bounce it, but Ely could just immediately play it again, untap and attack.
So Ely's going to attack for 4, put Joe Lossett down to 7, play a Wasteland and pass the turn back. Joe is going to sacrifice that Flooded Strand on Ely's end step. Going to fall down to 6, and he's going to be dead in a couple attacks, and he's not able to do something here.
Yeah, so we're seeing Ely have just enough pressure to make things happen faster than Joe is really ready for. Joe's not able to deploy his whole hand before he has to worry about his life total falling to 0. And Ely has provided just enough disruption to make things even more convenient for Joe, slowing him down.
Now Joe is going to use the Wear part of Wear Tear to get rid of that No Rod. This is going to free up his Sensei's Divining Top, and he's looking for something like Terminus here. He has a copy of Flusterstorm in his hand, so he will be able to protect his Terminus from the Force of Will that Ellie has in his hand if he decides to try and use it to stop something like that. But he's got to find it at this point.
Yeah, it also depends on how much mana Ely has available when this happens and what the storm count is. As it stands, if Joe just cast Terminus and Ely forced and Joe Flusterstormed, I believe Ely would have enough mana to pay for it.
So Joe is just going to play a copy of Karakas, pass the turn back to Ely. He is at 6 life.
And a lot of the times, the Delver decks don't have that many lightning bolts in post-board, so Joe may not want to worry about a lightning bolt too much, but the Delver decks usually leave in some number of bolts to deal with problematic things like Vendilion Click and Monastery Mentor. So Joe does want to respect lightning bolt, although probably assumes it's not particularly probable.
So Joe is going to go ahead and flash in a copy of Snapcaster Mage to try and block and get a reuse on a Swords to Plowshares. Ely's going to Force of Will, removing the Daze from his hand. Joe's going to activate his Sensei's Divining Top to look at the top 3. And I think he's probably looking for another spell that he can add to the stack to increase the storm on his Flusterstorm enough to be able to counter that Force of Will.
Right. The fact that Ely has 3 lands and didn't use them is extremely relevant in this situation against Flusterstorm. And this is one of the reasons why I typically don't like the soft permission when you're trying to play defense, is because when you're trying to play defense, a lot of times you're going to be initiating things later in the game and spending a lot of mana on your turns, and they're going to be at a stage where they have all of their mana open.
All right, well, Force of Will is going to resolve. Joe is going to go down to 2 from the attack. Ely's going to try and kill him with the Lightning Bolt, but Joe does have that Flusterstorm available to stop it.
Ely's still at 2, though, and this is pretty bad. Or Joe is still at 2. Sorry.
Yeah, Joe's going to go ahead and use the top one last time on Ely's end step to make sure that he knows 100% for sure what he's going to do on his next turn.
And we can see that Ely's kind of out of gas. Joe, with this top, can still do a couple things. You know, he still has another card in his hand. Joe can come up with some more action as this game goes on. but Ely's, just about to get the last bit of damage in.
And here is a Jace, which is going to be able to bounce that Sulfur Elemental. At least keep Joe alive for a turn. That way he can get a Brainstorm activation out of the Jace. Let's see what Ely finds on the top of his deck. It was a blue card.
If it was Snapcaster Mage, that would be pretty good. So it's just a Ponder. So the one nice thing about Ely's board, even though it looks pretty impotent, Joe's at 2.
Looks like Ely just found a Lightning Bolt.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he did. And I assume he will not choose to redirect it to Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is going to take this game for Ely Kassis and his Blue-Red Delver deck. He's going to even the score up, 1 apiece against Joe Lossett. Both players are 11-2. The winner of this match is going to be able to draw into the top 8. Quite a bit riding, and both of these players are cool, calm, and collected. Yeah, and certainly 2 players that are well deserving of a Legacy top 8. Both of these players have done extremely well in the Legacy format over a long period of time. Joe Lossett is probably a little bit more of a name brand player for a lot of people, but Ely has some real Legacy chops if you go digging around as well. Yeah, if you are from where Legacy is played, the northeast of the United States, you know who Ely Kassis is. For those of you who watch the SCG Tour a lot, you probably know who Joe Lossett is. Let's learn a little bit more about him. He is a member of Team Nerd Rage Gaming. In fact, he is El Capitan. He is 36 years young, from Redlands, California. He has 19 open top 8s. Wow, that's a lot. He has 5 open wins, 2 invitational top 8s. He was a varsity rower for the University of Colorado. He is a Star Wars fanatic. And much like you, he follows StarCraft 2 as closely as he follows Magic. Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was a time we were both at Open together, and we were rooming together because we're on the same team. And I brought my laptop, and we got to play a little StarCraft with each other. It was pretty fun. Who won? Well, we didn't play against each other because we only had 1 laptop. So it's more of like he would play for a little bit, and I'd look over his shoulder, and then I'd play, and he'd look over my shoulder and be like, yo, you should do this, you should do that. So if you and Joe battled StarCraft, I would win. You would win? Yeah. No contest? I'll beat anyone. Bring it on. You'll beat anyone? Yeah. Is it just because you're like younger, better reflexes? I'm only a little younger than him. I think it's mostly just that I have more practice. I think that's what it is, yeah. Well, how do you know Joe isn't just like a StarCraft master? I got to watch him play. He is good. He's good. I'm just my cocky, overconfident self. Fair, that's that Sugarloaf mentality. Oh yeah. All right, so we've got Joe Lossett, 11-2 on Miracles. For those of you just joining us, Ely Kassis just took game 2, even the score up at 1 apiece. He is on Blue-Red Delver. I keep harping on it, but it's real important that the winner of this match can just draw into the top 8 next round. They get a round to themselves, go get something to eat at the market. A wonderful Reading Terminal Market. Reading Terminal Market is awesome. For those of you who haven't use the restroom. Yeah, for those of you who haven't been to the Philly venue, we've got some great food options here. One of the fun things about traveling to a Star City event is you get to see these cool cities. I mean, we've shown a lot of them, on the schedule, and if there's one close by to you, it's just fun to go out, see a new place, try out the food, be around a bunch of other Magic players. The Reading Terminal Market, though, is one of the big highlights. Oh, it's gas. We've had both days. I just had a pork sandwich from the Knicks for lunch. Oh, yeah. For those of you who are local to the area or have been there before, you know that is just perfect. I was sitting eating my Denick sandwich just right before this round, and a guy walked over and he's like, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "Oh, Denick's." And I was gonna start saying, the Reading Terminal Market. You go this way, you go that way. He said, I know where Denick's is. You don't have to explain anything. You say Denick's, everybody knows what you're talking about. Well, it looks like both players are gonna go back for 6. Looks like they're going to mulligan. A gentleman's mulligan. You mulligan, I'll mulligan. Let's keep things even. I like it. Well, you get a scry. Yeah. And it's not quite even because one player's on the play. Yeah, I liked saying that it was even and they were both gentlemen. Let's stick to that. Or you have... so I've been playing more locally now that I'm on the West Coast and Seattle. There's not a lot of open events, so I go playing some Grand Prix, travel to opens when I can, but I've been playing a lot of FNMs. Yeah. And FNMs are great. I'll constantly be in my match and sitting next to 2 kids, 10, 12 years old. Their decks are unsleeved. Cards are every which way. They're both just playing with whatever they own. Yeah. And they'll look at their opening 7. Oh, this isn't supposed to be in my deck. Throw it over their shoulder. Draw another card. Like,
Nice.
oh, I don't have any land. Oh, me neither. All right, let's shuffle back in, put it on the bottom, draw 7 more. And I'm just like, you know what? You kids have fun.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to try and educate you on the actual rules.
Yeah.
You kids have some fun. You got time to learn the rules after you enjoy playing the game.
I remember the good old days when I would draw an opening hand that would have no lands, and I would just sideboard in more lands and then mulligan. You know, it's like back when I was a little kid and I thought luck was a real thing.
It is. Luck's a real thing.
We can talk about this later.
You have, so much like the skill bank, where you have and you
there's a luck bank too?
You deplete your skill bank as you're playing the event. You also have a luck bank.
You're going to have to show me where this bank is so I can deposit some luck. Save it for a rainy day.
The second from the left and straight on to morning. That's where the luck bank is.
Nice.
So it looks like both players are going to keep their 6. We're going to get some scry action. Joe's going to scry to the bottom. Ellie's going to keep his on the top. And Joe's going to lead off with just a lonely old Caracas.
Not an all-star in this matchup, but Joe can pull some pretty big shenanigans with it. He's got Vendoing Click and Venser on his side of the board, but on Ely's side of the board, there's no legends.
There is not. A big thing to note about Joe playing Caracas or just any only white producing land on turn 1, that means there's not going to be a counterbalance on turn 2.
Yeah, and that is a very worthy thing to note.
Ooh, it looks like Joe has another copy of Caracas in his hand. He does play 2 to facilitate all the legends that he has in his deck. But when you have 2 in your hand, that's rough.
Yeah, that really is. Certainly, you know, you do pay a cost for your mana base no matter how you build it, whether you don't have Caracas as often as you want or maybe you have it too often. Everything is a matter of just maximizing the reward and minimizing the risk.
Well, Ely's going to have a Delver of Secrets off his Volcanic Island. Joe's just going to fall to 19 using that Scalding Tarn to fetch a basic island and pass. This time, Delver is going to cooperate with Ellie, revealing a Brainstorm, which is just one of the best ways to flip a Delver of Secrets. He's going to get in for 3 damage, knocking him down to 16. And Cataxian Probe. So Ellie's going to fall to 18 life for the Phyrexian mana cost on that probe, but he's going to try and look at Joe's hand. Now Joe's going to respond with the Brainstorm to try and hide some information.
May also just be planning on setting up a terminus and figures that he might as well do it now rather than later if he's, you know, can gain a little bit more out of it by hiding some information.
Yeah, maybe he can walk Ellie into playing something like a Young Pyromancer here.
Yeah. Usually when I am playing against a Miracles opponent, I'll usually jam my first 2 threats as fast as possible just to kind of capitalize on the fact that early in the game a Miracles player doesn't have quite as much control over their draw. And then as the game goes on, I prefer to pace out my threats. And Ely may be looking to do a similar sort of thing. But we do see that Moat.
Yeah, we got a copy of Moat. Joe Lossett has brought Moat in against Ely Kassis.
So this is an old school card. They really don't make them the way they used to. But this is a card that Cho can play and makes it so that creatures without flying cannot attack.
So Joe's going to show a handful of lands, a Moat, and a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Not much going on. You have to imagine that he hit some great cards on top with the Brainstorm. Because if he didn't, that hand's kind of bad.
Yeah, that is for sure.
Ooh, and Ely's going to wasteland that Caracas. Joe has another copy.
And we see Ely, despite his deck not being really aggressive, we've seen these games him having just enough pressure and just enough disruption to make things inconvenient for Joe, which is pretty impressive.
So Joe's just going to play a Arid Mesa, pass the turn back. Ely's going to draw for his turn, crash into the red zone with that Insectal Aberration, bring Joe Lossett down to 13 life, and let's see what he can do here. Looks like he has a Red Elemental Blast, a Pyroblast in his hand, which could end up being very good considering Joe has Jace the Mind Sculptor.
So one thing that was really nice about Ely's play to use that Wasteland there is there was potential for Joe to set up a Terminus on the top of his library, and by wastelanding that Caracas, that means that Joe wouldn't have been able to miracle it when he drew it on the following turn.
So Joe is just going to fall to 12, use his Arid Mesa to find a copy of Basic Plains, and then go to his draw step. Looks like we've got a Swords to Plowshare, so he did finally find an answer for that Delver of Secrets. Whether it's actually going to stick, we're going to find out. Here's a copy of Brainstorm from Ely Kassis on Joe Lossett's end step, and Joe's going to try and Swords to Plowshares the Delver of Secrets, and it's going to stick. So Ely Kassis is going to go up to 21, but he's going to lose his clock.
Yeah, and Ely doesn't have very many clocks in his deck. He's similar to a lot of the other Delver decks where he's only playing, 12 or 13 threats. But in this particular case, because some of Ely's threats are Snapcaster Mages, they're a little bit more weak when it comes to pressure than normal.
And Joe also used a Flusterstorm on that Brainstorm to try and stop that card advantage for Ely Kassis.
Yeah, Joe's really shutting him down.
Now Ely does have a copy of Young Pyromancer here, which is very good. However, it's not very good against Moat.
It is not very good against Moat, and we are approaching that point. If Joe can land Moat, he's going to have the ground completely locked up. There's nothing Ely's going to be able to do.
So
and Joe probably knows that.
Ely's Gataxian Probe is going to take him down to 19. Joe's going to show Moat, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Wear Tear, but he is bricking on that 4th land and just going to pass back to Ely.
And a lot of the times with the Miracles deck, because they play so many basics, if you have Stifle and Wasteland, it's very rare for you to be able to actually lock them out of mana. But what you can do is usually lock them out of a lot of their turn 4 plays, or at least make it so that when they do cast their turn 4 play, they have to run into a daze. So in a matchup like this, that's definitely something to highlight. It's a little different than how you would normally see Wasteland in some of the other Delver decks.
So Ely's just going to attack for 3, knocking Joe down to 8, and pass the turn back. Joe is going to, to 9. Joe is going to use his fetch land, fall down to 8, get a basic island, and try and cast Counterbalance. But Ely has Spell Snare at the ready. It's going to stop the 2 converted mana cost spell. It's going to generate another Dylan Donegan token for that Young Pyromancer. And Ely Kassis is just 2 turns away from being able to close this game out if Joe doesn't happen to find a 4th land to play one of those 4-drops in his hand.
Yeah, and this is
and here's a Snapcaster Mage too.
Yeah, which is there. Okay, so he's going to flashback a Brainstorm.
He's going to flashback a Brainstorm. So this is going to put 7 power of creatures.
Yeah, this is pretty bad for Joe. I was a little unsure if Ely would be able to mount enough of an offense to beat Joe or be able to hang with him a long game, but it seems like things are lining up just fine for Ely.
Now if Ely's going to be able to put Joe to 1, now while he does have a Moat in his hand, this is going to effectively shut all of his fetch lands off from being able to be that 4th mana that he needs to generate.
Right, and Joe doesn't, I don't believe he has any sources of life gain other than casting Swords to Plowshares on his own creature.
So he needs to draw a basic Plains or a Tundra to be able to cast this Moat. And it looks like it was just a Swords to Plowshares.
Wow, so this is a little bit of a heartbreaker. Certainly a situation where I would normally put my betting money on Joe, but Ely, the Master Legacy player, takes down the opposing Master Legacy player.